The following is a special presentation of NBC 41.
Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. With Kansas City Crossroads, we take a journey through time by telling you the stories of our hometown. In Volume 4, we meet Windwagon Bill, who believed you could sail west across Kansas in a wagon by riding with the wind. We revisit the days when Kansas City launched nearly 1,000 ships to help win World War II. And we travel with some heroes of the Underground Railroad who understood that freedom was worth risking everything. So please join us on this journey through time. And thanks for watching Kansas City Crossroads.
Woven through time, a tapestry of stories defines who we are and gives us a sense of place. From NBC 41, this is Kansas City Crossroads.
When Main Street was just a muddy road leading nowhere, city planners had a vision. They wanted a new railroad depot away from the flood-prone West Bottoms, and they were thinking big. As Kansas City embraced the possibilities of the brand new century of 1900, the building of Union Station symbolized the growing confidence we had in ourselves. Before Union Station, Kansas City's depots were much smaller in size and scope.
The first depot dates back to the 1870s, and Octave Chanute, who was an engineer and responsible for the design of the Kansas City Bridge, or what we know it as the Hannibal Bridge, designed and built Kansas City's first depot, which was a modest frame building that was down in the West Bottoms on Union Avenue.
A much grander depot was built in 1878.
The area on Union Avenue was very busy. There were saloons down there. In fact, I've read as many as 23 saloons were located on Union Avenue. And at one point in the 1880s, it became apparent because of the growth of the railroads, the growth of the cattle and meatpacking industry and the agribusiness, that we needed a larger depot because there was a lot of railroad activity in Kansas City.
In 1910, Kansas City started construction on its beloved monument. 4 years later, on October 30th, 1914, Kansas Cityans celebrated the successful completion of one of its most grandiose architectural endeavors. Touted as the third largest station in the country, Union Station soon became more than a passenger station. It was the place to be seen, for dinner at the Fred Harvey restaurant or for a political rally. Throughout its heyday into the 40s and 50s, Union Station made memories.
When Union Station's activity slowed down in the 60s, when we didn't depend so much on rail for transportation, Kansas City's Union Station fell into the shadows. And for a number of years, there was absolutely, no activity there at all.
And now, Union Station is back, ready to make more memories.
Buildings become very important to people, not just because it's a pretty building. When people have memories of a building, there was an activity that was special to them that relates back to the building. Say, maybe they had their first date and they went to Union Station, or, it was one of their first train rides, that seeing it come back to life again is a very special moment in a lot of people's hearts.
And I remember Miss Norval, she said, I want you children to have the very best time you can have between now and graduation, because your lives are going to change, and they'll change forever.
In the winter of 1941, 18-year-old Ethel Cundiff and thousands of other young adults like her were about to have their lives interrupted by one of the most catastrophic events in the history of the world. We were at war, and Kansas City united in an extraordinary effort to build the wings that would take us to victory. During the peak of the war effort, more than 28,000 people worked at the North American Aviation plant in Kansas City, Kansas, building the B-25 bomber. Many of those bomber builders were women who ventured into the factories in record numbers to support our military forces overseas.
I learned to rivet, and I learned to buck rivets. I learned to squeeze rivets. At that age, I had never seen a rivet. I didn't know what a rivet was. I picked it up as I went along. It was very physical, but I was young, and it didn't bother me then. I could hop up on the wing of an airplane and bother me a bit. We had a lot of camaraderie. There were a lot of good friendships made. People had a common goal, and we all worked hard to do our share. We were proud of what we did.
Working 10 to 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, the bomber builders earned numerous excellence awards for exceeding production goals and quality standards. Between 1941 and 1945, the Fairfax plant turned out nearly 7,000 B-25 bombers.
So there were a lot of the boys who went over who didn't come back. And that made the work even more important.
The hard work paid off, and victory was declared on August 14th, 1945.
And to have the world at peace again, and not to have to worry about the kids that you knew who were over there in the most awful circumstances. But we were all wonderfully glad that it was over when it was finally finished.
When the bells echo over these majestic bluffs along the Missouri River in Atchison, Kansas, the monks here at St. Benedict's Abbey stop what they're doing to pray.
Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
Benedictine monks have been praying for 1,500 years following the rule of St. Benedict.
And will be forever. Amen.
It was Father Henry Lemke who arrived in Atchison in 1857 and thought this would make a great place for a monastery.
It's hard to convey what a radically idea it was to have a monastery on the frontier, especially before the Civil War, when there was all sorts of sectional violence across our state line. Benedictines traditionally have been known to be people who really aspire to a balanced lifestyle with prayer and work and life, recreation in common. There is truth to work making you free, and a life of obedience that pursues simplicity and humility and openness to other people is an incredibly fulfilling life. And what Benedict envisioned was that ordinary sinful people could actually pursue that life and realize a level of happiness that might be possible in no other way. Benedict said this: nothing is to be preferred to the work of God. And by the work of God, he meant the job of giving glory to God in prayer every day.
In God, whose word I praise, in the Lord, whose word I praise, in God I trust, I shall not fear.
We work with what God has given us, with great expectations about what the future could bring. And that's why we're in the education business. There's many young men who come to visit our monastery who leave after one day when they realize it's totally different from the romantic notions they had in their head. It's not all pomp and circumstance, for one thing. It's very human, But out of that, you know, humanity, there's a lot of joy. People should know that in Atchison, Kansas, on Highway 45, there is a house of God where they would be welcome anytime. They should know that. We're not going to dazzle them with great singing, you know, but they should know they will be welcome here. Father, Son, and Spirit blessed.
Kansas City belongs to all of us. Whether we stay a lifetime or just 6 months, it's part of who we are and what we will become. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. In October of 1917, a young journalist came to town. Though he didn't stay long, he took what he learned in Kansas City and shaped a writing career that put him exactly where he wanted to be, in the middle of the action. When he was just 18, young Hemingway stayed at a boarding house just down the street from his Uncle Tyler, who used some connections to get Ernest a job at the Kansas City Star.
It was a rough place, really, to work, but a very exciting place for Hemingway at the time. One of the things that he remarked about it was that it was this big room of journalists, and everybody was doing things, and everybody was yelling. It was just sort of an enormous room where energy flowed, and there was a hustle and bustle. We put him on the payroll at $60 a month, which was the lowest pay in the newsroom at the time. And we figured it out that it would be the equivalent of about $730 a month in today's wages. So not a lot of money. He always wanted to be where the action was and had sort of an uncanny knack of doing that. There was one time when he went out to cover a labor riot, and the rioters were throwing rocks and sticks at different people, and I think they had turned over a car or something. And so Hemingway was sent out, and apparently he forgot or ignored the journalism rule that you don't get involved in the story, you just cover the story. And so when the police showed up, Hemingway pointed out the rock throwers to the police, and this infuriated the crowd, who then started mobbing Hemingway and chased him. And so they had to escape by jumping on a trolley and getting out. And that was the kind of things that he would get himself involved in. He would talk about the Star Style book later on in life and the training he got there and how that made him a better writer. He would talk about how those rules for writing were the best rules he ever learned, especially the first few rules, which were use short first sentences, use short first paragraphs, be positive, not negative. His writing, even back then, you could tell there was a lot of talent there. Hemingway just had such a clarity of writing and a truthfulness in his writing that made you actually feel that you were there.
What he writes about are things that people care about. What he has to say is usually truthful insofar as he knew about it. He didn't know everything by any means, but he would certainly put down on paper what he knew. He was a person of great personal elegance who nevertheless did a lot of clowning and one of the boys, so to speak, but there was an element of him that was very well grounded indeed.
Untouched by time, Watkin's Woolen Mill near Kearney, Missouri still stands pretty much as it did when the doors closed for the last time in 1898. Nowhere else in the country will you find a mill like this one, where the equipment inside reminds us of the early chapters in the Industrial Revolution, a time when people left their farms to put in an honest day's work at factories, under conditions that many of us today would find unbearable. Waltus Watkins took the skills he learned in the cotton mills of Kentucky and opened Watkin's Woolen Mill in 1861. Here he employed 40 workers to weave the wool from sheep into yards and yards of fabric.
Basically, they worked from sun up till sundown, or sometimes from the time the whistle blew till it blew again. And you're saying, what whistle? the whistle that came off of the steamship that went up and down the river. They had a very high work ethic, and they had very high productivity.
Working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, workers endured excessive noise from the machinery, which neighbors 2 miles away could hear. The tedious, repetitive nature of the tasks often meant workers stood in the same spot all day long.
This mill, when it was built, made a tremendous impact. It was little things, but the price of material, for example, started to come down. People who hadn't been able to afford things could now have maybe curtains in their house. It gave them an opportunity to earn and save maybe money that they hadn't had previously.
Business thrived through the 1870s, and dozens of wagons left the mill every day carrying goods to stores in St. Joseph, Lexington, and Kansas City. Then the industry came to a crossroads.
In the 1880s, catalogs started coming both from Marshall Field's and Montgomery Ward's. And this was a tremendous change, a new opportunity for people to get their things to wear rather than making them. As you walk in here and you just realize, they just shut their door and left everything. They had plenty of money, that they didn't have to liquidate things. We were fortunate through history also that during the wars that they didn't come in and tear out all of this old metal and use it and melt it down for war purposes like they did out on the East Coast. Out there you can see the buildings, but the equipment that had been there has been long gone. And we're so fortunate here, I think, to have a piece of history that's been untouched by time.
It was called the swift, silent killer of 1918. People awoke with an achy feeling all over, fever and a severe headache. Often, they were dead by dinner time. The flu took its toll not only here in Kansas City, but across the country and around the world. Before the flu pandemic of 1918 had run its course, it claimed more than 20 million lives in less than a year. History tells us that deadly flu started just down the road in Fort Riley, Kansas.
March of that year, a cook by the name of Private Getchell reported to sick call one morning, reporting that he had chills and aches and pains and just generally wasn't feeling well. He was admitted and subsequently died. Later on in that day and over succeeding days, additional soldiers came in reporting the same symptoms. And from that, approximately 46 soldiers died in that initial outbreak of the influenza epidemic.
Troops who survived that initial outbreak were put on crowded ships and sent to World War I battlefields. They carried the silent killer with them. Gaining speed and strength, the virus spread around the world, killing 8 million people in Spain alone. By the time American troops returned home, the virus had a name, the Spanish influenza. It wasn't long before the flu infected the civilian population. Violet Bruner was 16 when the flu hit her Armourdale neighborhood in Kansas City, Kansas during the fall of 1918.
It dealt with crowds, and it seemed like if they had anything going on, and like parades and things like that, where there'd be big crowds, why, it seems like that's what made it spread so.
Schools closed, churches closed. In homes where there was sickness, quarantine signs were posted, and the Red Cross issued masks in a futile attempt to stop the spread of the deadly virus.
Well, as mysteriously as the flu came into existence, it seemed to disappear early 1919, and I'm not sure that historians know why it went away so quickly. And that is why there is concern periodically when a new strain of flu develops that there isn't a magic medical bullet out there to fight it with. It's evident that we, even though we are in the 21st century, are far from mastering our own planet.
Einstein taught us a little about the power of imagination. The creative minds at Midwest Research Institute here in Kansas City have imagined all sorts of possibilities. Combining science and technology, they've designed things that had never been done before, such as the automatic coffee maker. Through the years, the scientists and engineers at the Institute have taken us from M&Ms to the moon, using their imagination. Wartime technology kept Kansas City booming in the early 1940s, and it took a group of visionary businessmen to establish a place where scientists could turn those tools of destruction into forces for good.
One of our first projects was to take munitions that were used in World War II and to try to turn them, find a way to make them into fertilizer, taking war materials, making them for useful peacetime purposes. And the problem was they were all sticky and clumped together, and we had to find a way to make them be able to be handled better. In the 40s and 50s, we were more or less extensions of research arms of various companies. That resulted in some things like being a research arm for the Folgers Coffee Company here in Kansas City, where we actually worked on the formula for freeze-dried coffee and also did a lot to develop what has become Mr. Coffee, and if you want to get more sophisticated, Braun, and all those of today. Our role in the M&Ms was more to to improve the coating so it doesn't stick to your hands. It melts in your mouth, not in your hands. Not only do you need chemists to kind of figure out what the coating ought to be about, but you need engineers, process engineers, software people, hardware people, bring them together to solve a problem. And that was the M&M's case. It's mostly chemistry, some engineering, and so we not only made a better product, we made a better product more efficiently. We did some extraordinary things, both in terms of developing methodologies and processes to developing things like spacesuits for astronauts. The astronauts that go up in the space shuttle are cooled by cooling suits that were designed and made by MRI.
Somebody imagines something can happen, or there's a need, and then you create from that thought. I think anybody, when they're relaxed and really thinking, completely relaxed, they conceive of things, they imagine things. As a child, you imagine things. The Buck Rogers stuff, when I was young, which come to pass. So it's the creative mind, and that's what you need.
You get a lot of that here at a place like MRI because you have people who think that way.
Imagine running along the Missouri River with your children on a blustery cold night with nothing but the clothes on your backs. The mighty mow is frozen solid. At least you hope it is, because you have to get to the other side. You're passengers on the Underground Railroad. Destination, Quindaro. The Underground Railroad was neither underground nor a railroad. The conductors, people from all ethnic backgrounds who helped slaves reach freedom. The stations, hideouts carefully concealed from here to the East Coast and on up into free Canada. Quindaro was often a stop for the passengers on the Underground Railroad because many of the town's citizens offered refuge to slaves. citizens like Benjamin Mudge, an abolitionist and a conductor on the railroad.
Benjamin Mudge is a really, I think, one of the sterling characters in Quindaro's history. He's a geologist, a teacher, and he's interested in, as most of the people who came to settle in Quindaro, he came to help the abolitionist cause. It was a very dangerous business. Those people who got involved in it risked their lives every time they helped a person escape from slavery.
We came for the blacks that came running from across the river.
You'll not have them.
We got enough men, we can burn you out if we have to, so let them know. Let them out.
I'm well armed and ready for you people.
You know they're in there.
My boys are here to help me. Boys, get ready for anything.
Need some help?
I don't want to hurt anyone.
This kind of stand is really illustrative of Quindaroans in general. I believe that many of the people in Quindaro would have gone this extra mile and did in fact go this extra mile.
Quindaro was a witness to the great risks taken by the slaves and conductors on the Underground Railroad, who understood that freedom was so precious it was worth risking everything.
This kind of bravery is very significant in our history because it's a role model for the cooperation of races in what was the first real human rights movement on the frontier. But we can't ever forget that the very first conductors on the Underground Railway are the slaves themselves who have made it to freedom and risked their life to come back and take other slaves out. This is just a marvelous portrait of courage in our history.
Joe and Elmo were a couple of typical kids living in Kansas City in the 1920s, playing with sticks and tin cans in the alley near their homes, finding fun in simple things. Kansas City was a different kind of hometown in those days. For 25 cents, Joe and Elmo could have had an all-you-can-eat dinner at 5th and Walnut, or they could have had a haircut at the Barber College for just 10 cents. Families bought their groceries from a neighborhood grocer like Joe's dad, or dined on real home cooking at the Palace Cafe. At 10th and Main, fashionable folks were spotted in dapper suits and straw hats. One of the busiest corners downtown at 12th and Main was the site of the Newman Theater, featuring Fred Astaire shows, popular at the time. The Grove at 15th and Benton attracted youngsters like Joe and Elmo to its refreshing swimming pool. It was a time when Kansas City took care of its own, when the county gave its indigent citizens a decent burial in a spot called Potter's Field. As for Joe and Elmo, time marched on, and World War II took each of them to different parts of the world. Joe returned home to continue work in his father's grocery business. Elmo was seriously injured and lost his ability to speak. But the same character that earned him numerous honors in service to his country served him well through his difficult recovery back home. After 20 surgeries to repair his voice, he enrolled in law school at the University of Kansas City because he believed it would help him develop his speaking skills. It did. The war hero pursued a distinguished career in public service, including 2 terms as presiding judge of Kansas City Municipal Court.
When he was in the legal department of the city of Kansas City, Missouri, he saw they were purging their files of old pictures, 8x10 glosses, over 150, well, it was 170 some pictures, and they were throwing them out. And he saw that there was a lot of historical data there from old accident scenes.
What Judge Hargrave saved from the trash bin gives us all a glimpse of historic Kansas City from the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. In their later years, Joe and his good friend Elmo met over coffee on Wednesdays to pore over the old photographs and revisit the Kansas City of their youth. It was always Judge Hargrave's dream to share those photos with others. His friend Joe made that dream come true at the Kansas City Public Library. The Hargrave collection is a lasting tribute to an enduring friendship in this place we call home. Back in 1925, you could bake your own bread or you could pick up a loaf at the neighborhood grocery store. But if you were lucky enough to live in Kansas City, you could simply go to your front porch and pick up tasty baked goods from the Manor Man. From their main plant in Westport, Manor Bakery provided a service very few cities in the country had, door-to-door delivery. That was back in the days when bread sold for a nickel a loaf. By the time the 1940s rolled around, Manor men and their horse-drawn wagons were a familiar sight in Kansas City neighborhoods.
A lot of ladies told me that that's the only reason they brought bread from me and cake was so that their little girl or boy could pet the horse, you know. So, but old Bill, he liked the kids, and he'd look around, and if they wasn't out there, he wouldn't know where they were, you know. But old Bill, he was just a dandy horse.
Working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, Manor men were always on the move, serving as many as 300 homes each week. Running up and down terraces, they offered families popular salt-rising bread and tasty pastries.
The Manor Man announced himself in the neighborhood with his whistle. This is probably more effective when he still had the horse, the cart, than when he was driving his truck. But when he came to the door, he'd always say, "Manor Man," in a loud tone of voice so that all of us inside would know that he was there, and probably so that the kids in the house would come out and start asking for the parts of his basket that they wanted. I'm not sure that the Manor Man was really supposed to allow kids to ride in the truck. But there I was in the street, flagging him down. I'm a 6-year-old at the time. He stops, we talk, and I say, "Oh, sure, Mom wants to see you. I know she does. New customer." And he says, "Where do you live?" "Well, I'll just get in and I'll show you. It isn't far." And actually it wasn't. It was probably 2 doors down from where he picked me up. But it seemed to a little kid like a really big event riding in the Manor Man's truck. Now, I don't remember any of the sweet rolls. I don't remember any of the cinnamon rolls. What I remember as a Manor Bakery customer is the salt-rising bread. And 30 years later, I can make my own sweet rolls. I can make my own bread. I cannot make salt-rising bread.
When women joined the workforce in greater numbers during the 1960s, home deliveries stopped, and Manor became a strictly wholesale bakery, now operating as Earth Grains. Once a familiar sound to Kansas Cityans for 4 decades, the Manor Man's whistle is now silent, leaving us with sweet memories of days gone by. When Kansas City was a wide-open town in the 1930s, Jack Wally kept it in focus. As a photographer for the Kansas City Journal-Post and Life magazine, Jack recorded some of the most memorable moments in our city's history.
I had at that time a car absolutely full of burnt-out flash bulbs, tripods, and lights. You hardly could get in the car for the junk that was in the back. In that day and age, you had flashes that required bulbs. You didn't have the electronic marvels that they've got today.
When not using his car or a motorcycle to get to the news scene, Jack often took to the air for rare shots of fires, train derailments, and the devastation left from tornadoes.
You see very few aerial photographs even today. Too hard to get. You got to be kind of crazy to do that very much. Because at that time I was hanging out of biplanes.
Jack covered Kansas City with a buddy from the Journal-Post, John Cameron Swayze, who went on to become an anchorman for NBC in New York.
and seized on the thought of photographing some gambling operations secretly. Of course, this was about as difficult as anything I could imagine. So I bought the smallest 35mm camera I could find, put it in a black sock with a lens sticking out through a hole in the sock, and went in with John Cameron Swayze, who covered for me by standing more or less in front of me, and he'd move out of the way while I shot pictures of poker, people studying racing forms, and shooting craps.
Jack would go to any lengths to get the right photo.
I had strung with the help of the electrician at the post, a cable from the floor of the municipal auditorium to the ceiling, 90 feet above, across over a ring for wrestling, and then down the ring about 80 feet, and fired flash bulbs that would be strung over the ring with 6-volt batteries. I wasn't even sure it'd work, but it did.
One of Jack's most memorable photos was of Adam Rachetti, who was accused of being involved with Pretty Boy Floyd in the Union Station massacre.
One of the pictures I took of Adam Rachetti was taken the day that Sheriff Perdome told him that his appeal for new trial had been denied. Rather dramatic instance. I've seen a lot of dramatic things in the course of my years with the Journal.
There was a place in northeast Kansas City where it reached 3,000 degrees every day except Christmas. Beginning in 1887, this Kansas City hotspot shaped the progress of the country, first with nuts and bolts and then with rods of steel, relying on strength, determination, and a good dose of ingenuity to see it through the tough times.
Many, many, many people came here after a grandfather worked here, the father worked here, the son often came here. 2 and 3 generations worked here. This was more of a lifestyle than it was a job. You needed the job and the paycheck, of course, but it was a feeling of pride in what you did and how you did it. If you're a steel worker in Kansas City, predominantly if you really work for the steel company, you got to work for Armco, you got to work for Sheffield before that.
In those early days, this smokestack industry produced a golden haze.
The saying goes that when the sky is full and the sun's shining, you've got a golden haze that you look on, and that means the mills are running, everybody's working, we're all making money. When the sky is clear and there's no haze in the sky, the smokestacks aren't running, and the people are probably not working. The first 100% scrap-charged electric arc furnace operated right here at this facility in Kansas City in 1952. That was state-of-the-art stuff. That was unique. That melting facility that began in '52, converting from the old open hearth methodology, was very practical for a Midwestern steel mill that didn't have iron ore nearby. But they did have a lot of plowshares and a lot of old rail and metallic parts. And those, if they could be converted to molten steel and made into new products, well, what a great idea.
The plant continued to prosper and employed at its peak more than 4,000 people. And then came the 80s, when the entire steel industry was faced with foreign competition.
A roll of barbed wire that had crept its way up to $30 a roll could be bought at a co-op someplace, made by some other manufacturer, at $5 or $10 a roll less than that. It was pretty clear that our pricing, our costs, were out of line as it relates to the rest of the world. Kansas City held in there. They got smaller. They produced different products, fewer products, less variety, in hopes of keeping it alive.
By the end of the 1980s, the plant employed just 1,000 steel workers who kept the fires burning.
To watch steel production is almost mesmerizing. It's hot, it's noisy, it's massive.
Economic factors forced GST Steel to shut down its massive plant soon after the dawning of the new millennium, when the flame finally went out on the steel industry in northeast Kansas City.
The changes made in the Earth's surface show how determined Kansas City people were to have a city. Nothing could stop that sort of men. If a hill was in the way, they cut it down. If a ravine interfered, they threw the hill into it.
In 1908, librarian Carrie Whitney was describing the Irish, those hardy immigrants who carved the town of Kansas out of limestone bluffs, one back-breaking swing of a pickaxe at a time. It was Father Bernard Donnelly, a pioneering priest, who first invited the Irish to settle here.
And he brought them over and put them to work and treated them very well, which a lot of Irish immigrants at the time weren't. He put up little huts and places for them to live, and they used the craft that they knew so well in Ireland. Thousands of years back in Ireland, there's stone structures that are unique, and even archaeologists can't understand exactly how they were made, many without mortar or anything. The land was so covered with stone that when the farmers came along, they had to take the stone and clear the land. So they would make stone walls and stone huts, and it was the major resource they had to work with. There wasn't a lot of timber to build with, so they learned well to build with what they had available.
When they came to Kansas City, the Irish left their mark in numerous ways, including some of the brick and stone work that graces the city's oldest neighborhoods.
It was a labor of love almost, because the amount of work and hours that they would put into building the different churches, Redemptorist, Visitation Parish, the Cathedral, the Immaculate Conception, which was the one during Father Donnelly's time. They knew the craft and they could pursue it through their faith and then personally in their own homes and everything. So a lot of the beautiful stone structures and stone walls around Kansas City were built by the early Irish immigrants.
That labor of love also included building a foundation for the future, as every good storytelling Irish parent can do.
You would make sure you would always teach the youngest in the family the crafts to make sure that that was never lost. And it would be carried on, and you would encourage them to tell their next generation, because holding on to the past was so very important and is still very important to the Irish. They had a rich pride in their heritage, and that's why they fought so hard to hold on to it and why they wanted to pass it on to the next generations and share it with everybody.
Those who paved the way for the next generation often showed great courage.
And when they waved goodbye to Ireland, that was for many the last time they would ever see it, and they knew that. So the kind of bravery those people had to be able to come to, really be explorers and come to a whole new land knowing nothing about it, is something I very much admire.
For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. One of the few remaining links in Kansas City's jazz heritage can still get your feet a-tapping. It's the power of the music, and the power of a man whose stature in musical history makes him larger than life.
His roots are in the string band tradition in Oklahoma, and it spans through the development of bebop and Charlie Parker. So Claude has literally lived through every movement and new development in jazz.
You got to see Mama every night, or you can't see your Mama at home. You got to see Mama, treat her right, or she won't be at home. Go.
The violin is not an instrument common to jazz, but he was one of the early violinists and has remained true to his instrument all these years, despite the fact that often club owners said, get rid of the violinist. We don't want a violin in this band.
Took me a long time to be able to play this thing in tune, because It's still the hardest instrument in the world. It's never been mastered, the fiddle. It just get good and better and better. You learn how to play something in Kansas City, you can play it anywhere.
The thing about Claude is Claude knows how to play changes. He doesn't play just the melody. He doesn't follow the melody, he plays changes off the melody. And this gives him an edge in jam sessions. And this is why saxophonists and trumpets and other soloists in jam sessions like to play with him. You know, he's very inventive that way. You know, Claude, 92 years old, still playing the violin every day. Just that is an inspiration for all of us. He never gave up. Never gave up. Continued to play. You know, he becomes, I think, a symbol of the endurance of the human spirit.
Though they didn't know each other and had never met, they shared a passion for art. After their deaths, the estates of a famous newspaper publisher and a modest retiring school teacher combined to create this grand place we know as the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art.
It's a wonderful story of serendipity because so many things in the most amazing way came together to make all this possible on a scale that no one would have ever dreamt.
The school teacher was Mary Atkins.
This was a person whom very few people knew. She lived modestly. She didn't keep a horse and carriage or a motor car. She rode on the streetcar and was very retiring and modest in all ways. She was married to James Atkins and lived in Kansas City, and greatly to her sorrow, he died after some years of marriage, leaving her an inconsolable and very rich widow, as it turned out.
Friends and family coaxed her out of her deep despair and encouraged her to travel.
She did make 5 trips to Europe, starting in 1902. She particularly loved going to the museums in Germany and the Louvre in Paris and the National Gallery in London. And from these visits, which gave her so much pleasure, she conceived the idea of trying to share that pleasure with the community in Kansas City. And so in her will, she left this very substantial sum of money to create a museum of art.
The newspaper publisher was William Rockhill Nelson, who had shrewdly invested his considerable fortunes from the Kansas City Star in places other than the stock market.
So the Nelson family monies and Mary Atkins' money all formed a pool of about $3 million when it came time to build the building. Of course, and that was a wonderfully large sum of money in 1933, probably the equivalent of $100 million today on today's value.
Beginning in 1930, those funds were used to purchase original masterpieces and to construct the immense limestone structure, giving work to hundreds of Kansas Cityans. Opening day for the Nelson-Atkins Museum of Art was December 10th, 1933.
To have a cause to celebrate in the middle of the Depression, and in the middle of December, I suppose, was a happy thing. It was a novel thing for people in 1933 in Kansas City to be able to come to a first-rate art museum created on this scale and filled with art of this caliber. I think Mary Atkins would be excited to think that her idea for a museum for Kansas City had been realized on such a splendiferous scale as this gallery represents. I think she would have been pleased to have had a part in this.
During the golden age of Hollywood, Kansas City had a give-and-take relationship with Tinseltown. We gave them big stars, such as Jean Harlow, Joan Crawford, William Powell, and Walt Disney. And Kansas City took Hollywood's movies and distributed them all over the country.
In the early 1900s, silent film was, of course, one of these amazing things like the internet is today. I mean, people were going to movie theaters and these larger-than-life images coming at them were just fascinating. I mean, just mind-boggling. And what looked like it might have been a fad turned into a reality. They caught on. It was cheap entertainment. For 10 cents, for 15 cents, you walked into a magnificent world to see a faraway world and experience something that you may never see in your life any other way. And it was very real.
It was also a very real business here in Kansas City. Our town served as one of 32 film exchanges throughout the country, with offices and screening rooms for all the major studios located on 18th Street's Film Row.
When a theater owner from Chillicothe, for example, would come down to do their business, they would just walk down the street, go to Paramount Pictures, United Artists, MGM, Columbia, do all their business, make their buys, and then walk over to the Screenland Cafe and have lunch and leave town.
And what's a movie without popcorn? That idea also popped up on Film Row at Manley Popcorn Company.
You know, even back then, a dime bag of popcorn had very little cost in it, and Manley specialized in units that could be rolled right inside and right next to the box office, and you could buy your popcorn. As the film business changed, for example, 1948, there were 96 million Americans that went to the movies every week. In 1988, there were 26 million Americans going to the movies every week.
Television changed the way we were entertained, and it wasn't long before the film rows of America fell by the wayside.
Most of the other big cities have torn down their film row buildings. Kansas City is, if it's not the only one, it's one of very few that are actually left intact, with most of the film buildings still intact. And now it's, we recognize the importance and the value of some of these old buildings.
Those old buildings in the Crossroads Film Row district are a reminder of our ticket to Hollywood, where we can visit faraway places without leaving our hometown.
The experience is still the same. It's to take you into that world, to take you through a porthole of fantasy and fun.
English was a language spoken by very few of Kansas City's earliest residents. The only jobs available to many immigrants were as unskilled labor, often inside the mammoth meatpacking plants near the stockyards. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka. Today on Crossroads, we revisit those days when thousands labored in Kansas City's packing plants, putting meat on our tables. By 1886, 9 major meatpacking companies had opened plants in the West Bottoms, including Swift, Armour, Cudahy, and Wilson, whose workers lived close by.
They lived down in the bottoms, what they call the bottoms. And then it was a patch. They had shacks, no sidewalks, nothing, you know, no running water. The 1903 flood cleaned out everything they had down in the patch, took everything. They couldn't get a damn thing out of there. So they come up here barehanded, nothing. Coming this west from James Street Bridge, there's Big Bear Hill, and wild strawberries were growing there. And that's where the name Strawberry Hill comes from.
During the 1951 flood, the homes on Strawberry Hill were high and dry, but the packing plants were underwater again.
And I didn't know what the heck to do, and I saw these boats coming up, or government boats, you know. And they were taking people down at Swift to work. On the way down, we used to always bring tires with wheels on them floating down. You see a hog, every once in a while a cat or a dog in the refrigerator. piece of furniture, anything was undone. And then we got off on the west side of the plant at the smokehouse, and got off on there, and then we walked into pork. Got off on the 4th floor. Now that was the only stuff that was salvageable because the beef was on the 2nd floor, and it was all underwater. But we got these halves that called hogs. They were up in the coolers, and they just had a skin holding 2 halves together. They cut the skin, and then it's cut into 3 pieces: the ham, the shoulder, and the belly. And we wrapped it in anything we had, newspaper, boxes, or anything, and loaded them on the boats, and then down to 23rd Street, and they'd load them on refrigerated trucks and take them to the St. Joe plant. We didn't lose an ounce. And I'd say, just for a guess, there must have been over 2,000 hogs. And we worked 24 hours. And if you think they weren't some fannies dragging, well, we had some sad-looking guys.
Even though the plant survived the '51 flood, the packing houses eventually were torn down one by one, but the families on Strawberry Hill stayed.
Our people were not gypsies. They got to a place and they stayed there, and that was it. And of course, it took their life's work and all that to hold what they had and raise their families, but they did a good job.
Every week since 1919, the Kansas City Call has been delivering the news. As our city's oldest weekly newspaper, the Call is a dominant voice in Kansas City, helping to elect a mayor and leading social change. And that's just what founder Chester A. Franklin had in mind.
He did not want people buying the paper every time to be attracted by some great big headline about who killed somebody. Not that he didn't want the truth to come out, but the whole idea was we should do everything we can do to stop this. He was most interested in a newspaper that would help build the often used word nowadays, self-esteem. You didn't say that then, but the feelings of people to have pride in themselves.
Building a newspaper on the positive rather than the negative was considered a novel idea at the time, as was hiring women. One of his early hires was a KU journalism graduate, Miss Lucille Bluford, who served as Mr. Franklin's managing editor and then publisher.
I claim that Lucille Bluford would ask anybody anything and that they would answer. There are other people can ask anybody anything and they don't get the answer. She was a natural.
Miss Bluford is the preeminent matriarch. She is unquestionably, even today, the most influential woman in the black community.
Miss Bluford and the Call did more than simply report the news during the turbulent 60s and 70s. They led the effort to bring about change.
Without the Kansas City Call and certainly other similar newspapers around the country, I don't think that the civil rights movement would have moved as quickly as it did. I will tell people any day of the week that I would never have become the mayor of Kansas City without the Kansas City Call. The Call ran its first color photograph ever on the week I was elected mayor. It was a turning point for the black community in Kansas City as the Call saw it. And so they did something that they had never done before because Kansas City had done something it had never done before. The Call is an institution. It is a part of the world. And if the Call had not yet been invented, there would be people meeting somewhere in Kansas City trying to create the Kansas City Call. It has been, is, and will remain eternally a part of the Kansas City landscape for African Americans.
Growing up, you can probably recall someone who recognized talent in you. Maybe a talent even you didn't know you had. And maybe if you did know, it took someone who believed in you to help make your dreams come true. Perhaps it was mom, or dad, or someone who touched your life in such a way it changed forever. Dr. Patricia McIlrath was that someone for thousands of UMKC theater students.
She really nurtured a place, like a parent, like an adult bird nurtures a nest. And it was incredible. She nurtured the acting community. So we knew she had passion, we knew she had compassion, and she was not afraid to display it. And through that, we learned. She wanted people to come see the theater because of what theater could do for them. Her vision was to produce great theater for Kansas City and to provide a working place for theater artisans. I think we need professional theater in Kansas City, and that's the way she talked. Her eyes would squint and she'd focus in.
Beginning in 1964, Dr. Mack nurtured the seeds of professional theater with a 2-week summer schedule of plays in an old wooden, non-air-conditioned playhouse. By 1979, the Missouri Repertory Theater Company performed for 22 weeks in a brand new $12 million theater.
Theater taught by Patricia McIlrath didn't come from an ego. It came from worshiping the craft, worshiping the influence that you have on the audience, to make them laugh, to make them smile, to help them through a tragedy. Whatever the message of the play was, carried into the hearts and the minds and the souls of the people who watched it. Every single theater in Kansas City that exists was started or is still managed by her former students. Every single theater. Who in the world would have had more influence in any arena? We've got great lawyers, we've got great bankers, we have great teachers, but in the theater, they all point their origins and their beginnings to Patricia McIlrath. What's phenomenal to me, I think, more than anything else, is that one person did all of this. One woman did all of this. And I know she wasn't alone, but boy, she was the only one out there. It was a tremendous life, and I miss it very much.
If it hadn't been for a Kentucky rainstorm, you know, one of those real gully washers people have to wait out before they can go anywhere, Kansas might not have made horse racing history. But it did rain. And because Mr. Herbert Wolf of Kansas City was in a Kentucky auction barn, and many other people were not due to the rain, Mr. Wolf bought one of the greatest breeding sires in American horse racing history for a fraction of what he was worth. After the auction, Mr. Wolf brought Insco home to Kansas, where Insco sired Lawrin, a real long shot, in the 1938 Kentucky Derby. Herbert Wolf was a fan of horses, no doubt about it. But he's probably best known for his family's clothing stores, started by Wolf brothers Samuel and Alfred in Leavenworth, Kansas. After the building of the Hannibal Bridge, the brothers moved the business to Kansas City, where their store at 11th and Walnut was a familiar downtown landmark for nearly a century.
He was considered a business genius by his peers. He did a lot of different things in Kansas City. First he had cows, and then he got rid of them all. And then he had these trotters and pacers, and that kind of went away, and he got interested in these saddlebreds and race horses. He had 3 different farms. The one that I remember was at 79th and Mission Road, and it had a stable for about 40 horses and 3/4 mile training track, and it also had a starting gate.
There, horses thrived. And in May 1938, one Prairie Village horse named Lawrin made a trip to the Kentucky Derby.
The
64th running of the classic Kentucky Derby.
The day of the race found record crowds filled with excitement. Fans perched everywhere to get a glimpse of the finest 3-year-old thoroughbreds run for the roses. Lawrin's odds were 8-1.
Ben Jones, who was the trainer, called up Eddie Arcaro, and they flew him in. And they decided to go walk the track, and they looked at the track, and they found a bunch of holes by the rail. And he said, whatever you do, just don't ride by this rail. Don't do it. And as it happened, the horse picked at the opening chute right by the rail.
Now they're at the post.
Lawrin's eagerness was evident at the starting gate. Proudly wearing Wolfwood Farm's maroon and white colors, jockey Eddie Arcaro was about to see if he could win his first Kentucky Derby.
Here they go. A good start with bold.
Running 5th for most of the race, Lawrin kept everyone in suspense.
Heading into the far turn, Lawrin is moving up. Jockey Arcaro is asking the Missouri colt Lawrin to show them now. Lawrin is responding.
After the final quarter turn, Lawrin pulled into the lead. He won by a length.
Lawrin's supposed to be nothing but a sprinter. He stems the challenge.
With Herbert Wolf, Ben Jones, and Eddie Arcaro proudly in the winner's circle at Churchill Downs, Lawrin proved that a horse from Kansas could win the biggest race of all.
This is the most unlikely place for a shipyard. Yet from this point, Kansas City launched nearly 1,000 ships to help win World War II. It was an extraordinary time, and people did extraordinary things. Here in the landlocked Midwest, Kansas City Structural Steel learned how to build boats, big ones. After building much of Kansas City's skyline, Kansas City Structural Steel knew how to do things big.
Landing crafts were made in sections, and they were about 12 feet wide and 8 feet high and 32 feet long. And then they were loaded on trucks and shipped across Kansas City, Kansas to the Fairfax district on the Missouri River, where we had a shipyard. And then those sections were assembled to make the entire boat, and where the engines and all the paraphernalia the Navy wanted on them was installed. And then after they were installed, they were launched into the Missouri River.
Landing craft built in all different shapes and sizes, from as far away as Omaha, from Leavenworth at Missouri Valley Steel, and here at the Darby Shipyard, were all launched from the banks of the Missouri River in Kansas City.
They went down the Missouri River and to the Mississippi, and down the Mississippi to New Orleans, where they were loaded finally on large ships and shipped out to the invasion points that they wanted them at.
Kansas City's boats were shipped to Normandy, the South Pacific, wherever they were needed. Before the war ended, Kansas City Structural Steel had made 407 landing craft, one almost every 3 days.
The LCTs were over 100 feet long, and they would hold several tanks or trucks, whatever was needed, plus some men that they used during the invasion. We had built these big sections, and they were weigh 10, 20 tons, and we had big overhead cranes which could handle those things. We had to get to the Missouri River because the call wasn't deep enough, and so it was quite a sight to see them going down the ramp and hitting the water and making this big splash and so forth. There was a lot of quality put into the boats in those days, and I think everybody realized they were trying to help the war effort. I think whether it was in the North American plant or the boats or the ammunition plants in Kansas City, they all, I think, did their best. Made you proud that you'd had participated in something that you knew was using and helping to win the war.
Peering out from under his snap-brim hat, he saw clearly what needed to happen in our hometown. With integrity and grace, he led us through turbulent times and carefully charted a course that changed the way we thought about a lot of things. After a heated campaign, Ilus Davis started his first term as mayor in 1963.
The city he inherited in 1963 had just gone through I think, a very stressful period of time. And it sort of regressed almost to the old days of Prendergast, with politics deciding, I mean politics in the worst sense, not the best sense, politics in terms of influence deciding what you should do.
What Ike thought he should do was get voters as enthusiastic as he was about such mundane issues as improving the sewers and cutting the grass.
We spoke almost every day, go to luncheon groups in women's homes, and go out and make sure you talk to beauty shop operators who communicated with a lot of people. I don't know if politicians do that anymore. He was a master at understanding what was possible and then organizing all the forces to get it done. And then his integrity always showed through. People had this great confidence in him that he had no other agenda except what was best for the city.
That public confidence enabled Ike to do things many believed couldn't be done. He convinced enough voters to pass the first public accommodations ordinance in the nation, guaranteeing equal access to blacks and whites in public facilities.
In the field of civil rights, he had probably one of the most important 2 terms of any mayor we had in Kansas City, because it was all happening at that time. Before we had public accommodations, believe it or not, black people could not eat anywhere in Kansas City. They had one restaurant that you could eat in down on Baltimore, but no place else. You couldn't have a drink anywhere else. You couldn't stay in a hotel. That was all broken down with the public accommodations bill that passed with only 1,700 votes. Ike was not a raving liberal like people are, but he was a person who knew and recognized what was right and wanted to see it happen. And he saw things that were not right, and he wanted to do away with them. It was just as simple as that. He stood for what was right.
I think those who haven't lived through this don't understand what it's like to be in that kind of a situation. It is not only frightening, but it brings home to you why you have to have laws and also have an understanding of dealing with problems.
It was springtime, 1968. Kansas City, like cities across the nation, was in despair. Martin Luther King had been assassinated, dashing the hopes of thousands who believed he was the promise of better tomorrows.
They wanted jobs. There was a high unemployment rate among black people at that time. And I think that had a great deal to do with the attitude of the people at that time.
We can't wait any longer. Martin Luther King was laid to rest on Monday, April 9th, 1968.
Their intention was to walk to Central High School, and there on the grounds of Central High School, on the playground, have a memorial service of their own. But the police interrupted it. Now, they never would have gone downtown.
By the time the students reached City Hall, others, including the mayor, had joined the march. As the crowd grew, so did police concern. Mayor Ilus Davis was a calm voice.
He was a good talk, and his sobering kind of a way that he had, and everybody was listening to him. All of a sudden, I was standing there, tear gas started hitting all around. And I was so worried about the children and trying to get them out of there that I was overcome by tear gas.
That tear gas was the beginning of 5 days and nights of rioting in Kansas City streets. 6 people died.
There was a curfew. I mean, at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock, you couldn't be on the street unless you had official reason to be there with the National Guard. You may not understand why the other party feels as strongly as they do. But if someone feels as strongly as they do and they want to strike out, then you've got to not only use whatever force is necessary to stabilize things, but you better correct what's causing the problem.
Out of the riot, which was bad, some good manifested itself. And many things opened up following that riot, strangely enough. There were more jobs made available. There was a lot of things that were done by people of goodwill.
In the early 1940s, a cultural phenomenon was taking shape in Kansas City. It was the crossroads of hamburgers, heavy cars, and curbside service at places like here at Mugs Up, and at Sydney's and Winstead's. But it was about so much more than malts and fries. We found comfort in those familiar spots where somebody always knew your name.
I got acquainted with so many people, and they, I don't know, I learned their cars, their kids, their dogs, and before long they changed cars, the kids grew up. And I had a lot of good kids that come in. They used to borrow money from me even to buy hamburgers. A couple days later they come back and pay me back. It was fun. It was just a fun job. I loved every minute of it.
Maybe not every minute.
And you know, I'll tell you something funny. The first time I waited on the curb, took a soda out on the tray, put that tray on, that soda flew over into this man's lap, and the vanilla ice cream went right into his pocket. And I used to wait on him after that, and he'd kid me, he said, "No, I'm not going to order a soda, I'm just going to have a Coke." It's funny now, but it wasn't at the time.
Flo soon mastered the art of serving sodas and continued taking orders curbside for 31 years.
When I waited on them for so long of a time, I knew what they wanted: 2 hamburgers and 2 Frosties, 2 hamburgers and 2 Cokes. One of the hamburgers might be cut in 2. Just remember, lots of times people would drive in, I have their order ready by the time they got in their stall. 10-cent tips, that was a big tip. And you know what our pay was? $1 a day, $5.92 a week. No, I was called the lady with the tall hair, and that's what a lot of people ask for me. I want the lady with the tall hair.
Hamburgers and Frosties for you and your date would set you back 40 cents in 1941. But the sights and the sounds were priceless. These were the places to be and be seen after high school ball games and movie dates.
Well, Roy and Ray's was up here on the hill at 44th and Main. They used to go up there and buy French fries and come down here and eat them with their hamburgers, because we didn't start selling French fries till 1957. And then there was Allen's, Sydney's. But this still was the most favorite place. This was always a place that was packed. And they didn't want them to honk their horns, they wanted them to flash their lights. For service or reorders, or pick up your tray.
But people were rarely in a hurry for their trays to be picked up. In those days, drive-ins were places to eat fast food slowly, to linger in the company of friends.
I don't know when they went through this drive-through stuff. I don't like it, I never did. I still don't. You know, when I get in this line sometime, I think, golly, if I could get out on the curb and wait on those people, I could wait on them a lot faster than they're going through this line.
High school, football games on Friday nights, cramming for exams, first love. Memories made in those locker-lined hallways stay with us for a lifetime. Today on Kansas City Crossroads, we revisit a remarkable time at one of Kansas City's public high schools, recognized across the land as one of the best. Southwest High School opened its doors to 951 students in the fall of 1925, and for the next 50 years, Southwest flourished as a neighborhood school.
When I walked to school, I would just stop along the way, and, by the time we got to school, there were 10 of us walking together.
There wasn't anything they couldn't do. They joined pep club and literary societies. They hammed it up on stage. They outdistanced the competition on the athletic field. More than anything else, they had a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. Southwest graduate Richard Smalley won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. Several graduates became Rhodes Scholars, and national magazines continued to proclaim Southwest as one of the best high schools in the country.
Their parents impressed on them the importance of a good education. So when you sat in that classroom, you paid attention and you respected the teacher.
This was a day and time when students looked up to their teachers, even though an occasional reminder was often called for.
We all remembered Louis House, who insisted on discipline, and one of his favorite forms of punishment was to borrow a shoe from an offender and whack him where he sat down. And he didn't mete out 8 hours. It was on-the-spot justice. Those teachers left behind a legacy of admiring, respectful students who remember them to this day.
Sarah Van Meter was one such teacher who was highly revered by those in her English literature classes, where gum chewing was not allowed.
She ingrained in her kids a love of English literature that lasted a lifetime and enriched their lives forever.
But times change. During 1974 and again in 1977, teacher strikes prompted many parents to move their children out of the Kansas City School District, and the Supreme Court decision of 1971 put an end to neighborhood schools in Kansas City.
There is an opportunity to regain in some form those traditions and those achievements, because Southwest produced people who were important not only to the neighborhood but to the school and to the country. And I'd like for people to remember that and to dedicate themselves to saying that that happened again.
You've never seen anything like it. That expression, no doubt, has been worn out over the years. But we hope you give it another chance today on Kansas City Crossroads, because what R.A. Long did in 1913 certainly lives up to those words. Long dreamed of a place in the country where his daughter Lula would have room for her horses. And after helping early Kansas City build its homes and businesses, he set out to build a farm. When he was finished, there really was nothing like it anywhere. Sprawling over 1,700 acres in the countryside, 21 miles east of Kansas City, Longview Farm was a self-sufficient community with its own telephone system, movie theater, dairy, and chapel. In all, there were 51 harmonious buildings in matching cream stucco and red tile rooftops.
There was not a thing on this place that wasn't first class. They're awesome barns. The woodwork in it varnished, the brass fittings on doors. That was put together nicer than anything that people had in their homes. The brick flooring where the horses walked, nameplates made out of polished brass. Everything was polished. Huge big pieces of timber, miles, 25 miles of fencing, white fencing, and not a nail in it. Not one nail held up this fencing. And that was an amazing thing. People would just drive by to see the fence. They painted it all the time. You'd always see crews out painting the fence, always painting a section. It never got old or dirty or broken. The grounds were always attended to. Everything was always mowed. The trees were trimmed. The flowers were cut back and fresh. The flower beds were tended. And, of course, they did have a lot of employees to do this. I understand they had 300 employees at one time that took care of the farm. They would have a weekly picture show for their help, which was awesome because nobody ever did that. And they kept their help for years because they treated them so royally. They had their own hotel on the place, they had their own electrical system, their own security system, their own water. I mean, it was a self-sufficient farm. He insisted that the children of the workers on the farm get good, wholesome milk, and that's the same reason that they raised all these crops. He wanted everybody to have good food and good milk.
After Mr. Long died in 1934, his daughter Lula and her husband R. Pryor Combs made sure Long's dream lived on. Today, nearly 600 acres remains of Longview Farm.
There's nothing compared to this farm, absolutely not a thing compared. There's no way that this farm could be put together financially now to buy the tiles, to find the lumber, to find the artists that put this farm together. These were not workmen, these were artists that put this farm together.
After we've read them a story, kissed them goodnight, and tucked our children into bed, we trust they will be safe. During the first half of the 20th century, after lazy summer evenings, thousands of Kansas City parents tucked in their children with extra care, plagued by a nagging fear they might suddenly be stricken with a virus that would leave them paralyzed for life. Little was known about polio, which left much for families to fear.
The virus was transmitted more efficiently during the summer, swimming pools or personal contact, those kind of things, and it was characteristic of the epidemics to occur in the summertime. And there was nothing you could do about it. The symptoms primarily started out with kind of symptoms similar to the flu that we experience in the wintertime. That is, they would have sore throat and headache and fever and then muscle aches. Of course, once a child began to experience muscle aches, or certain muscle groups would begin to twitch or develop spasms, pains in them, and then sometimes that was the end of it, but more often, probably than not, that led then to paralysis of that muscle. The iron lung was kind of the ultimate, I suppose, fear, but was at least a method of treating. And that is, once it was appreciated that a child was developing paralysis of the respiratory muscles, then the iron lung was the next step.
Dozens of physicians across the country and here in Kansas City focused on finding a way to protect children from such a fate. Dr. Herbert Wenner worked tirelessly at KU Med Center to unlock the mysteries of polio.
He defined how the virus spread in the body and how to prevent that spread in the body. Of course, then Salk and Sabin developed the viruses that were used as a vaccine using that kind of knowledge, that it was possible to induce immunity, that is, to immunize against the infection. And much of that was Dr. Wenner's work.
April 12, 1955. Victory over epidemic poliomyelitis.
The vaccine was just a miraculous thing for families because it offered a means to protect their child from, this great fear. Initially, it was an injectable vaccine, but I mean, folks didn't care, anything to help protect their children. There is hope that it will be eliminated in the next year or two. The number of countries in which polio is present is down to just a handful. This has really been just an amazing saga. So we're getting close.
They thought he was crazy. Maybe he was. He wanted to sail west from Kansas City in a wagon across the prairie. And in the wide-eyed, anything's possible times of the 1850s in Westport, some investors thought that wasn't such an impossible idea. So Windwagon Bill took those investors on the ride of their lives. And as you'll see, when you ride with the wind, you can wind up anywhere.
The investors were tickled to death, and they turned out a big wind wagon that they thought would carry enough tonnage to really make a profit in the Santa Fe trade.
Gentlemen, take a look.
After the wagon was built,
I give you the wind wagon.
Windwagon Bill and his investors took the wagon out on the prairie, about 3 miles out of Westport, or in the vicinity of the Shawnee Indian Mission.
Can he stop it? Well, he's got brakes. I sure hope they work.
Where many of the investors got into the wagon, tied their hats on their head, gritted their teeth while Bill raised the sail. The passengers in the wind wagon were not too sure of this entire event. The more they got down the trail, the more they thought about it. And I'm quite certain that some of them had brought a small flask of liquid courage,
I think I could use some of that.
which was probably passed around somewhat. Very possibly, the passengers of the first wind wagon didn't realize how fast they were going to go, running against the wind. And as the wagon began going faster and faster and faster, even some of that liquid courage wore off. And they began to leave the wagon, one by one, in the most expedient manner, which was over the side and onto the ground, where they rolled in the dust, and fortunately, none was reported to be hurt. Windwagon Bill, however, hung on, and unfortunately the wind changed. The wagon slowed. Windwagon Bill realized too late that the steering was broken. The brake was broken. And when the wind came up again, it pushed the wind wagon in the opposite direction, and he was able to make it only go in a large circle. And the wagon made the long, long circle until it came to an area near present-day Turkey Creek, where it broke through a fence, went down a 10-foot gully, and into the creek and shattered. Windwagon Bill was all right, but that pretty well ended the saga of the Windwagon in the interest in those investors.
You okay, Bill? I'm fine, boys. Sure, I'm positive. Yeah. Boys, one more chance?
Think about transportation in the late 1800s, and what probably comes to mind is the horse, the wagon, or the train. Certainly not the word bicycle. Jesse James or William Rockhill Nelson didn't ride a bike. But the fact of the matter is, the bicycle fascinated early Kansas Cityans. It was reliable, even fun transportation that didn't need food or water. And soon, we were on a roll.
They're just so much fun to ride. The bicycle, because of the large wheel, will balance itself. And so you essentially, to get started, you push off on the bicycle with your foot on the rear step and get it going, and then just climb up onto the bicycle and start pedaling.
At first, the high-wheeled bicycle was a toy of the rich. Price tag in 1888, $150. Social clubs spun out of these novel contraptions, and Kansas Cityans watched in amazement.
It was a really big deal. They formed bicycle clubs. Sunday afternoon, the club, they would get together and go for a ride. And they would all mount up and wear their club colors or costumes and take off on the Sunday ride. And people would literally line the streets and watch them go riding by. It was a really big event.
A big event for the rider was his first hill.
Going down the hill, quite quickly, the wheel gets going faster than what your feet can stay on it. And so you take your legs and put them up over the handlebar and then coast down the hill, and you can get going quite fast. And it's a little scary, but it's fun to do.
Put fear and fun together and you get racing. Racers learned painfully that lower was better. So eventually the seat came down and so did the price. By 1898, more than 10 million Americans owned a bike, and bike racing was a huge spectator sport. At Kansas City's brand new convention hall, both men and women raced in front of 12,000 people who came to watch the spills and thrills on the high bank turns. Tilly Anderson, one of the greatest women racers of the time,
one in Kansas City on October 17, 1899.
And so women started riding bicycles then, and it was the first time it was kind of proper for them to go out unchaperoned. Susan B. Anthony said it was the greatest thing for women was bicycling, that it freed them and they were able to get out and do things on their own.
With so many cyclists pedaling helter-skelter down the middle of the road, soon there were traffic laws and speed limits to keep things from spinning out of control. Bicycle clubs lobbied for paved roads.
Ironically, as the bicyclists pushed so hard for better roads and for paved roads, they literally paved the way for the automobile.
And the rest is history, except for the thrill you can still get riding a bicycle.
It seems like it's every child's dream to have a pony. And for several lucky Kansas City youngsters known as the Rough Riders, those dreams came true. Hello, I'm Bill Kalahurka for Kansas City Crossroads. Performing at rodeos and carnivals, the Rough Riders enjoyed a childhood many would envy. And they had one incredible summer in 1941, one they would remember for a lifetime.
I was a Rough Rider from the time I was about 9 on. My remembrance of the Rough Riders was hot, dry, hard Sunday afternoons when we would practice those drills. When we did the trick riding, you know, we had what they called the fender drag. You'd hold on to the horn and lay your body down alongside the horse and let your hand fly in the dirt, you know, and the death drag. We went, as fast as the horse would go. It was good. We did everything rough. We were the Rough Riders. This is true.
That hard work paid off. News of the talented Rough Riders spread around the country, and it wasn't long before Hollywood was impressed. So impressed, they brought their cameras here to Kansas City in August 1941 to make a full-length movie starring the Rough Riders.
It seems incredible now. We did it in 2 weeks, but they were 12-hour days and hard days, long days. But we always had a box lunch in the middle of the day, and all of the kids thought that was wonderful. We'd never had a box lunch. But the filming itself was done with one camera, so that meant there were lots of retakes. The movie included all of the kids. We all rode, some had speaking parts, but we were all included, and that was great. We did have a sense of confidence because you had practiced. You knew what you were to do. It was like, hit your mark and do it.
The movie, Rodeo Rhythm, had its world premiere at the Granada Theater in Kansas City, Kansas.
It was all of glitter. I think there were even Klieg lights there. But it was a shining time, and we were all having such fun. And we were all so anxious. It was the first time we would have seen it as well.
The date was December 12, 1941, 5 days after the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
I think the younger people don't realize about the beginning of the war like that. It kind of shut down an era for us. I can remember the feeling of just growing up fast.
He was a local boy, born in Olathe, Kansas in 1880. And during his lifetime, he developed nearly 1/6 of Kansas City into neighborhoods we call home. With meticulous attention to detail and a careful plan, J.C. Nichols built a city that set the standard for design and quality that was known around the world.
On a list of the top 100 urban design developers, J.C. Nichols ranks number 4. The reasons why include the Country Club Plaza and those neighborhoods to the south we know today as Crestwood, Brookside, Armour Hills, and those to the west in Fairway, Prairie Village, and Mission Hills.
A landscape architect helped design the Nichols neighborhoods, which often included spacious parks where children could enjoy the outdoors and form lasting friendships.
One of the unusual things about Crestwood is that in several instances there are interior parks behind the houses that have no public access other than through people's yards.
Nichols knew that neighborhoods were more than real estate, so sculptures and quiet fountains often graced the expansive green spaces, one of the many distinctive Nichols features.
The idea behind those islands and parklets, as he liked to call them, was again that it gave a difference of feeling and appearance to the neighborhood. Really, in Nichols' thinking, a neighborhood comprised an area where people could easily walk for the various services, if you will, that they might need. And those services would include shopping, they would include schools, they would include churches. The Brookside area built up primarily between 1910 and the beginning of World War I and was the first large-scale, truly middle-income area that Nichols developed. He had plans as early as 1915 to put a shopping center at the location of today's Brookside Center, but the onset of the war in Europe prevented that from taking place until after the war was over, and so the Brookside shops did not open until roughly 1920. He brought in some of the best ideas from elsewhere, and then, particularly as we got into the 1920s and 30s, real estate developers and land designers across the country began to flock to Kansas City to see what Nichols had been doing here. And he became recognized, certainly, as one of the premier land developers in the country.
J.C. Nichols built these neighborhoods at a time when discrimination in housing was prevalent. Those restrictive practices were abolished by a Supreme Court ruling in 1948 that opened the doors to fair housing in J.C. Nichols neighborhoods and elsewhere. For Kansas City Crossroads, I'm Bill Kalahurka. If there ever was a time that electricity was in the air, it was in 1922, when radio arrived in Kansas City.
And the excitement at that time, which I don't remember, but I've read about, was unbelievable. I mean, it was more exciting than man landing on the moon. Everyone had to get a radio. I mean, you had to be the first in the block to get a radio. They couldn't make them, sell them fast enough, but it was part of your life. It was just central to what you did. It was, you know, it was your connection with the world. It was that important.
We often think of other cities like Chicago and New York as producing a lot of programming, but Kansas City in the 30s produced a lot of programming that was heard over NBC and CBS. A notable one was called Happy Hollow, which was a soap opera set in a small little rural town. It was produced by Ezra Kemp, who was known as Uncle Ezra, and a number of local talent, musicians as well as actors.
Our Happy Hollow friends are all in a flutter these days.
The important thing was how much you could visualize what was going on at the time. It was, I mean, you could just see everything that they would show. Of course, they'd have sound effects to make you use your memory and use your brain in order to visualize all the things that were happening at the time.
Have the herd of the Red Horse gone?
Yeah, the Red Horse Ranch was produced by KMBC, which was on eventually the CBS network, and Red Horse Ranch was an attempt by the owner, Arthur B. Church, of the radio station to highlight the Texas Rangers, which was a local Western group that he hoped would become quite famous and maybe get some Hollywood contracts. It included a lot of local talent as well. Many of these programs were produced on large 10-inch discs, and they were played at the convenience of the radio station. Sometimes they were done live in the studio. golden age traditionally is a time when the art of something is at its peak. And I would tend to agree that the art of radio was at its peak in the 30s and continued on up into the early 50s. Can almost date when radio changed dramatically, and that was in Kansas City, and that was 1953, when television came in at full blast. What I'm wondering is if there will ever be a return to the art of radio.
The mornings are the quietest time of the day. When usually it's just, you know, the animals and some far-off noises. You know, there's just a bond that I was born with that, you know, holds me to this land. It's also, you know, kind of a hold that I owe something to the land, and I want to keep it here and keep it as natural as possible. 5 generations is quite a while here to have stayed and been on the land, and you know, I think it's just important to keep it going. There's just some kind of a energy I get from getting out and, you know, being out with just nature. To just take Nitty out and the mule and go check the cows is, you know, usually my favorite part of the day. I should do that every morning.
Hey girls, come on.
You just get out there and can enjoy the beauty and the nature, and it kind of takes all the everyday thoughts away. You know, and you get to thinking about this fence or that fence needs to be worked on, and, you know, how much your calves have grown. And just the nature, the part that you can't do anything about. I think that's probably the most important part. You can kind of see why we love to go out and work on fence. Because once you've built that fence, hopefully for years and years you can go back out and look at it and say, hey, one morning for an hour we went out and built this, and it'll be here forever. When we needed to expand the ranch in some way, and it wasn't a viable idea to try to buy more land or have more cattle, so it was time to add something so that we could stay and always have the ranch. And that's how the inn came in. You know, just fix a little breakfast and have these beautiful rooms. Who wouldn't want to come stay? People need a place to get out to, and we don't all have this wonderful place that, you know, was our families forever. Everybody just doesn't have that anymore. Most people have a relative that lived on a farm, and they have great memories from that, and they can kind of come here and transfer them here and get that same, you know, attachment and just be glad to get back to nature for a little while.
Turn-of-the-century Independence, a town full of possibilities. And for a boy named Harry, it was just the place to earn his first dollar. At the age of 14, Harry Truman found a job at Clinton's drugstore at the corner of Maple and Main Streets. Working 7 days a week, Harry learned valuable lessons that would follow him all the way to the White House. J.H. Clinton's drugstore was located across the street from the Jackson County Courthouse, the centerpiece of Independence Square, where the town's residents gathered to conduct the business of the day. Harry found himself in the center of it all.
He went to the drugstore prior to going to school and opened the store, and he went there after school, and he stayed there until 10 o'clock, and he worked Saturdays and he worked Sundays. Truman's time was really sort of memorable to him. It wasn't just the stuff of later presidential biographies. George Washington never really did cut down a cherry tree, but Truman did work at Clinton's, and he would recount this not only to friends but also to his family.
I can remember the first $3 I received for working a week. 7 days from 7 o'clock until school time, and from 4 o'clock until 10 at night, and all day Saturday and Sunday. I had to wipe off bottles, mop the floor every morning, make ice cream for sodas, and wait on customers. It was in Jim Clinton's drugstore, where the Crown drugstore is now, that $3 silver looked like $3 million and meant a lot more. I bought a present for Mama and tried to give the rest to Dad, but he wouldn't take it. It was, as I say, a great day all around when I got that $3.
People would come in the store, and among the other things that they were looking for was not only drugs and toiletries, but they were also looking for a drink. And Truman would reach down under the counter and pull out alcohol for them and serve it to them, and they would be rather grateful. That way they could have a drink without having to be seen crossing the threshold of many of the several saloons that were on the Independence Square. He called them the high hats, and they didn't have to be sort of seen consuming alcohol. And out of this, Truman sort of realizes is that there's a hypocrisy sometimes between people's public persona and what it is that they do privately.
Nobody was really surprised when President Harry S. Truman and Bess Truman chose, when their time in Washington was over, to come straight home to independence.
It is remarkable and interesting is that Truman, when he left the presidency, chose to come back to the place where he had sort of grown up, chose to come back to the people who sort of knew him, chose to come back and walk the streets and talk to his neighbors and knew them by name and stopped and visited in their houses and saw them and spent time with them. This wasn't a president who went to some compound to write his memoirs. This wasn't a president who joined corporate boards. This was a president who really returned literally to the place that he had come from.
Struggles between people who hold different beliefs have been part of the human experience since the beginning of time. In 1830's independence, those differences in belief led to episodes of mob violence that drove Joseph Smith and an entire religious denomination out of Jackson County.
At the time that the Mormons came to independence, it was the edge of the civilized world. There was only a courthouse, 2 or 3 merchant stores, and maybe half a dozen log cabins. But to them, it was the chance to realize the ideal of Zion, which was to be, according to the prophet Joseph, a holy city of God, a place where they could worship the way they wanted to, where they could build their temple, where they could live in peace. The question is, why would they leave their homes, their businesses, their farms, and their family and friends to come? And the simple answer is, they believed that Joseph Smith was what he said he was, a prophet of God.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints did not find peace in independence. Because the Mormons did not hold slaves, they were not accepted in pro-slavery Missouri.
They felt the Mormons were going to come in, incite the slaves to revolt, and they would lose their slaves. There was also concern, as the population grew larger in independence, that there would be a time when the elected officials would be solely Mormon, and there was economic jealousy as well. On July 20th, 1833, a call went out for all citizens in Jackson County to come to independence and try to determine a way to rid the county of the Mormons. And over 400 to 500 men came in brandishing daggers, pistols, whips, and clubs, ready to get the Mormons out. The home of W.W. Phelps in Independence, which also housed the printing office in the upstairs, was immediately attacked. Mrs. Phelps and a sick infant, as well as the children, were forced outside. Furniture was thrown into the street. The printing press was destroyed, and the documents in progress were all demolished. Following that, the fury of the mob was not abated, and they went out to try to find whatever leaders they could, drag them into the square where they were tarred and feathered, and drove off in each direction, declaring that whatever man, woman, and child they found of Mormons would be whipped.
The Mormons fled independence in 1833, continuing their quest for Zion,
a peaceful place where they could practice their beliefs in harmony with others. They were welcomed for a time in Liberty and Clay County, but eventually they were asked to leave there too.
Certainly, the town of Independence and Liberty, ironically with their names, didn't appear at the time to be places of independence and liberty, but now the settlers and the old residents of Kansas City have come to accept and love the Mormons as their neighbors, and we them.
History tells us the Civil War erupted from conflicts over the issue of slavery. But before the Civil War, the issue of slavery prompted another war called the Mormon War in 1838. Here at Windblown Far West, north of Kansas City, this memorial is all that remains. After mob violence drove the Mormons from Independence, Alexander Donovan, a state legislator, introduced a bill creating Caldwell County as a safe haven for the beleaguered Mormons. There they established Far West, a prosperous city of 5,000 people.
After some time, and Far West became larger and stronger, the old enemies from Jackson County came into the picture again. There were further hostilities, there was some violence, there was tension.
Hearing reports of the hostilities, Missouri Governor Boggs wanted the Mormons to leave the state.
He issued in the end of October an extermination order which stated that the Mormons were mortal enemies and that for the common good of the people of Missouri, they must be forcibly expelled from the state or, if necessary, exterminated. Within several days, a militia group of almost 6,000 troops gathered outside the city of Far West under the command of General Lucas. When Joseph Smith and others came out to meet with General Lucas, assuming they were negotiating terms, they were immediately placed in shackles and imprisoned.
After an illegal court-martial, General Lucas ordered Alexander Donovan to execute the prisoners.
His response, which was incredibly heroic because he was in insubordination, was to say, "This is cold-blooded murder. I will not obey your order. My troops are leaving at 8 in the morning for liberty, and if you execute these men, I will hold you accountable before an earthly tribunal, so help me God." His heroism and courage so intimidated General Lucas that he was not able to bring himself to order the execution himself. And the prisoners were taken together and taken through several jails, eventually landing at Liberty Jail, down in the dungeon. Liberty Jail was a cold and dark, and remember, this is the winter of 1838, with no heat, place where they were not even able to stand. The ceiling was so low in the dungeon, they had to crouch or sit or kneel at all times.
Without sufficient evidence to hold them, the sheriff allowed the prisoners to escape. Joseph Smith led the Mormons out of Missouri and settled in Nauvoo, Illinois, where once again old animosities forced them to leave. Joseph Smith and his brother were murdered. It was Brigham Young who led the majority of the Mormons across the plains to Salt Lake City, where they finally found peace.
Kansas City Crossroads is a production of NBC 41, proud to bring you the stories of the people and events that have shaped our rich heritage.